This video is designed to go over some of the key concepts we discussed in Lesson 2-14, Find a Rule. The goal is to be able to look at an input-output table and find the rule for the pattern. A $100,000 tip I gave you for free during this lesson is that if the numbers increase, the operations can only be multiplication or addition. If the numbers decrease, the operations can only be either division or subtraction. Something else that we talked about, in order for something to be an actual rule, it must work for all of the pairs in the table, not just for the first or second pair, but for every single pair in the table, the rule has to work. And also what you want to do is try your rule on each input to make sure that it produces the correct output. So don't just do the first two and think that's the rule. You have to go through every single one and make sure your rule applies to each input and output. So here's an example of an input-output table, and we can see that on the input we put in 3, out comes 15. Input we put in 5, out comes 25. Put in 8, out comes 40. Put in 10, and out comes 50. Now, our goal for the lesson today is to take a look at the all the numbers 3, 5, 8, and 10 in the input and see what's happening to them in order to get the numbers in the output. Now, if we remember our key tip of the day, that if the numbers are increasing, the operations can only be addition or multiplication. If the numbers are getting smaller from the input to output, that means the operations can only be subtraction or division. Now, we can obviously see that the 3 is getting bigger because we put in 3, out comes 15, put in 5, out comes 25, and so on. So we're basically limited to 2 operations, so that kind of gives us a pretty good shot on choosing the correct one. Now we need to figure out whether it's addition or multiplication. Now, what I do is I take a look at my 3, and I need to figure out what is happening in that 3 in order to make it 15. Now, there can be one or two things, multiplication or addition. So I want to think about addition. So let's say 3 plus what gives me 15. I know 3 plus 12 gives me 15. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this and see if that plus 12 rule applies for every other number, because it has to, for every other number in the input and output table. So what I do is I look at my 5 and I add 12 to my 5. Now I know 5 plus 12 only gives me 17. So we can see that the addition operation is not the correct one for this input-output table. So what I will do is I will erase this. And now what I'm going to do is I know it's going to be multiplication. I have to figure out what happens to 3 in order to get it to 15, or what do we multiply 3 by in order to get it to 15. Now I know 3 times 5 equals 15. Now I'm thinking the rule is multiply by 5 for each input and output. In other words, every number is multiplied by 5 to get to that output, but I need to check it for every single one. So I have my 5, I multiply that by 5, I know that gives me 25. 8, I multiply that by 5, I know that gives me 40. Now, even though the first 3 have followed the rule of multiply by 5, I have to do it for every single one. So I do go down to my 10. If I multiply my 10 by 5, I know that gives me 50. So I can see that the rule for this table is multiply by 5. In other words, we're taking the numbers in the input, we're multiplying by 5 for every single number, and that is what's given us the numbers in the output box. So that is how you take a look at a table and figure out a rule in Lesson 2-14.